All right, hello there, everyone. This is going to be lecture 22. This is going to be over chapter 18, Mexico. We're going to skip a lot in this chapter because Mexico has an incredible and chaotic and massive history. So I'm going to let you guys read a lot of the history stuff, and we'll just sort of talk about the newer stuff. Okay. Um, I really want to, first of all, lastly, I guess, is say thank you to everyone for taking my course. I really hope you enjoyed it. I hope to see you all in future courses. You've all done very well in this class. Um, it's a tough class. It's a lot of writing, and so I appreciate you sticking with me. Um, like I said, I really hope to see a lot of you in the future, and if not, maybe I'll see you next week on Friday for the graduation. So, thanks so much for being here. Okay, on to Mexico. So Mexico is democratic and moderately wealthy. They're actually in OPEC, not OPEC. They're in the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. It's sort of the rich country club, OECD. There's about 30 countries or so in it. Um, it has some serious problems, though, right? It has serious problem with corruption. Um, Corruption runs rampant in Mexico. There's a lot of theft of government assets. There's a lot of cronyism and patronage. There's a severe amount of drug violence and disappearances and executions and just truly horrifying, inhumane acts that occur between drug gangs and between the state and the drug gangs and between the drug gangs and the state um, and against innocent civilians and business owners. I mean, it is a brutal place in some areas. The Economist suggested recently that about 40% of Mexico's territory is controlled by the drug gangs and not the Mexican state, which is very concerning, right? So we'll see if the new president Scheinbaum can do anything about that, but she's got her hands full. Guns are also a severe problem in Mexico, and this is one of Mexico's biggest frustrations with America is that they have a flood of thousands, hundreds of thousands of guns that are bought legally in Texas and in other border states and then smuggled into Mexico, either in exchange for money or for drugs, all kinds of things. So there have actually been some pretty serious busts under the Biden administration for people who were going down to some South Texas gun stores and buying, 300 military style weapons all at once, and then they just followed them, smuggled them across Mexico, and so they busted up a couple of these rings lately because Mexico is furious with the level of guns in their society and how many of them are coming from America. They also have real problems with poverty and inequality. There are at least 10, probably 20 billionaires in Mexico. A lot of people live in extraordinary poverty. Um, and then you have extreme immigration, which is another problem, not only from Mexico, which is actually sort of a dying trend, right? Mexican immigration to the United States has been declining since arguably 2007. But immigration from Venezuela, Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, etc., flooding through Mexico to the United States, the levels are just through the roof, right? And we saw them peak at the end of last year. It's like 350,000 a month or something. I mean, it was just outrageous. Okay, they have a population of about 120 million, so they're a vast, vast country. They have a really highly diversified economy, and agriculture plays a very small role in their economy. A lot of it is that middling, sort of lower to middling industrialized stuff, right? Making sort of middling wares, making the parts that will eventually be in a finished car or a finished tractor or whatever it is. It's highly urbanized, so about 80% of all Mexicans live in an urban area. Mexico City is one of the largest cities on the planet. They call it a megalopolis. It's like 20 million people in all. Um, And they have a long, long history of authoritarianism, not only pre 19th century under Spanish colonialism, but also during the entire 20th century, basically from the 1920s to about 2000, where they basically lived under a one party state for 80 years under the PRI, the revolu- the inst dang it, what is it? The Revolutionary Institutional Party. Yeah, so um, yeah, they lived under authoritarianism for a very long time. So the 1920s basically brought on the end of the revolution. You guys can read all the history where their state is collapsing. They're giving up large chunks of their territory here and there. They have a huge revolution, hundreds of thousands of dead in the 1910s, and so the 1920s brought the end of the revolution. The state is in utter disrepair. They're roving bandits. They had to build institutions from scratch, basically, and so their very first institution they built in 1921, which was education. They opened a central bank in 1925. They started to really professionalize the military by the end of the 1930s to get rid of some of these sort of roaming bandits. And during this time, which caused a lot of consternation, was the state splits from the church. And so a lot of Mexicans were angry about this, but so was the church. Um, They developed the PRI, like we talked about, the Institutional Revolutionary Party. They didn't really have an ideology, right? It was all about just control the state. Like say whatever, do whatever. It doesn't. The ideology doesn't matter. It's about power. Um, the entire party apparatus basically is controlled by whomever the president is at the time. They even got to, just like today, basically, they even got to sort of hand pick their successor, right? Um, they wanted control of all aspects of life, right? So this runs into medical care, it runs into education, it runs into infrastructure, it runs into who has what jobs and not, who has a government position, who gets handouts, all of these things. And they also were very careful about redistributing land, like constantly over these 80 years, to make themselves look like sort of the champions of the peasants. And that's what sort of won them their base at all times. Unfortunately, they had a lost decade in the 1980s, right? So they instituted ISI just like everybody else. It crippled their economy. They're in extraordinary debt by the 1980s. And in 1982, they decided to just stop their debt payments, and this caused a massive collapse of their system, enormous inflation. The Mexican peso is worth nothing, and capital is just flying out of their country left and right, right? And so they step in and they try to put in some neoliberal policies. They really start repressing wages. They cut public spending and the number of jobs in sort of public departments. They signed NAFTA in the early 1990s. And this is basically the death of the ISI policy in Mexico when NAFTA is signed. And as we know, NAFTA hasn't been great. It's been better for Mexico, I would say, than the United States. The United States lost a lot of manufacturing jobs, caused a lot of consternation. Mexico has lost a lot of agricultural jobs, but they've tended to do better than the United States has. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next, which is one of your final project questions. Okay, democratization, elections, and the state is section 5. So the PRI won every single election and ran the state basically from 1920 to 2000. And in 2000, Vicente Fox from the National Action Party, the PAN, won the presidency. It was incredibly huge moment. There was a free exchange of power, and people sort of hailed it as the first moment of Mexican democracy. In recent times, it's been the Moreno Party, which is neither PAN nor the PRI. It's kind of this outsider party, right? Called Moreno. AMLO was the president before, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador. Um, right now, AMLO had to just step down because they have a 1 6-year term in Mexico. So right now, Claudia Scheinbaum, who was basically handpicked by AMLO to be his successor, she was sort of a, I guess, medium known mayor. She was the mayor of Mexico City. She did some pretty good things, but also some troubling things in Mexico City, as you know, with their water infrastructure and things like that. So we'll see how she handles the presidency for the next 6 years. It'll be interesting, especially since Moreno has been largely anti-Trump. So um, it'll be interesting to see if and how they butt heads. Okay, they also have extremely high levels of violence, not only by the traffickers but also by the state. Right? There's a lot of violence, disappearances, executions by the state itself, like the I don't know 50 or so poor student kids that just disappeared off the face of the earth in 2014, and they discovered that the military was involved, the government was involved, etc. So they tried to blame it on narco traffickers, but journalists sort of hunted down the truth. And some of those journalists themselves were killed. That's the next point: is that lots of student protesters, opposition politicians, journalists, etc., are assassinated or killed or executed or tortured. It's horrible. Um, they also have an extreme level of corruption and sort of normalized bribery. Like, you can't expect to get shit done in Mexico unless you're willing to pay a bribe, right? And you might have to pay 10 bribes in a day. You might have to pay the cop who pulled you over just to get a bribe. You might have to pay the government official to get this paperwork you need. You might have to pay the narco traffickers to cross through their territory. You might have to, like, it's crazy how many bribes you have to pay. Um, and now most of the immigrants are sort of collecting in Mexico because Mexico's been trying hard not to let them cross into the US, at least toward the end of, at least before the election, right? And I think that that was a tactic used by AMLO to try to reduce Trump's ammunition. It didn't work, obviously, but I'm interested to see if Mexico lets up a little bit on their immigration policy and lets people start crossing the border again. So just because they're, what's the point in protecting um, Biden or Kamala, right? Okay, that's what I got for you. Thank you again so much for being here. Um, I hope to see you all in the future and have a great day.